Good morning, Michigan. A very pleasant Friday to you. The last day on earth. If you listen to this sort of evangelical fella, he's 89 years old, and his name is Harold Camping. And he says at 6 o'clock Saturday night, we're going to experience the rapture. It's going to be the end of the world as we know it. And he's going to watch it on TV. He's talking about a worldwide earthquake that could be the end of the world as we know it. And there are rapture parties, just in case he's right, being held all over the country. Now, this has some striking sort of ripple effects because tomorrow night there's a Powerball lottery worth $120 million. I have a ticket, and that's after 6 o'clock. Also, the Preakness Stakes tomorrow night at Pimlico. That's not till 6:30. So, you know, if Animal Kingdom is the favorite running at 2-1, how does it run in earthquakes? We don't know that. It's not on the chart because typically they don't have horse races in earthquakes. Anyway, these are some of the things you're going to want to consider if it is the end of the world as we know it.
It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine.
Yeah, this is not quite the end of the world, but it is a little bit of a surprise in Michigan. You read the Wall Street Journal this morning. The headline is Michigan Budget Deal to Benefit Schools and the Rainy Day Fund. And it says that Michigan Governor Rick Snyder reached an agreement with the leaders of the Republican-controlled legislature on budget expenditures, and that reduced proposed education cuts and start replenishing the nearly exhausted Rainy Day Fund. One of those leaders that the Wall Street Journal is talking about is the Senate Majority Leader, Randy Richardville, the Republican from Monroe, who's on the other end of our line. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Michael Patrick. How are you this morning?
Good. When you go back to Monroe and you have your first sort of, VFW speech or Rotary speech or something like that, and you stand up there before the podium and they say, tell us why this deal is good for us, what would you say?
Well, there's a lot of things. I have been telling people at groups like that for the last few months that I'm more confident in Michigan's government today than I have been in the previous 10, 15 years I've been up here. Because they're energized, ready to work, and going at things. This governor is looking at Michigan and treating us like a business. I mean, we're being run like a business. And that's why Wall Street is interested in writing about Michigan. That's why investors around the country, and more importantly, our own investors right here within Michigan are looking and saying, hey, you know, Wall Street's looking at us. We're starting to pay off some of our long-term debt. We're starting to pay off some of our unfunded liabilities into the future. We're living within our means. We're building reforms that are linked to performances and dollars. So for the first time in a long time, we're really looking at balance sheets and income statements versus appropriation bills and pork barrel spending.
You did have a little wind in your sails, obviously, or at least the governor did when he had both the Republican House, Republican Senate, and then suddenly at the end a little surplus money to play with it. That all greased the skids, really, didn't it?
Well, certainly, you know, we have a good working relationship among people that are like-minded, fiscally conservative group of people that are now running the show, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And sure, that's helpful that we're all wanting to go and we all are planning to go, and now we're executing, going in the same direction. Again, that's toward financial responsibility. And we're going to spend about $1.5 billion less this year than we did last year. And if you remember back to November, the voters were very clear. That's what they expected. Live within our means, make our money do something for us. We don't feel like we're getting a decent return on our investment. Help us with that. And we went in and rolled up our sleeves, and I think worked pretty hard at it.
Senator Whitmer, on the other side of the aisle, the Democratic leader, was not too happy yesterday. She was hot. Here's one example of what she said about the fact that everybody was all smiles yesterday. The Speaker of the House, Jace Bolger, we talked to earlier, yourself and Governor Snyder. But here's what Senator Whitmer said.
So, yes, I'm glad you've negotiated amongst yourselves to hurt schools less. But that's not good enough.
What would you say to that?
Well, you know, Senator Whitmer and I are I'd say, pretty good friends and colleagues. Mm-hmm. And we agree to disagree sometimes, but I heard the speech on the floor yesterday. I wouldn't agree with the perspective. I don't believe what we're doing is hurting schools less. What's difficult for some people to see is that if you look at the entire state government, the amount of funds that we don't have, taxes that we can't increase, we can't continue to bully our economy and try and tax ourselves into prosperity. It doesn't work. the Democrats so far in this budget process asked for another $1.2 billion worth of spending. The only problem with that is that they didn't say where the money was coming from. So if you add up those different amendments that were thrown out in committee, it's another $1.2 billion, and there's not another dime on the other side. They voted against any kind of increases in revenue, the changes to the business tax. And so if you can't have a comprehensive solution, sure, it's easy to say, hey, let's try and pick apart the other side. But what we have is a balanced budget that started off with almost a $2 billion, something like $1.8 billion deficit, less spending, and now we've changed our whole tax structure so that small businesses can grow again. And I think it's just a responsible thing to do.
Where is the medicine in the sugar here? Who gets it the worst? What was the toughest part to implement?
Well, I'll start on the other end, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
The cut to schools, the devastating, life-stopping cuts that they're talking about, totaled about 2.8%. Okay, so that's what we're talking about, around 2.8% less than what we spent last year. So we think that we'll be able to work through that the best that we can. Everything is tough. The pension tax, the change in pension tax structure, which has not been told, the whole story hasn't been told about that, was a difficult part of the vote because nobody likes any revenues to go up. But when you look at the inequities there, it was the only way that we could really move into the future and address that structural issue. So that was probably the toughest political part of it. And it wasn't all that much money. When you total it for this year, it's something around $300 million out of a $45 billion budget. But it's the future revenues based on taxing pensions in the future that we couldn't leave our children and grandchildren with.
All right, we will, I guess, see you next, probably on Mackinac Island for the policy conference. Everybody will be able to be there now since you've got it all to bed, right?
Well, yeah, I think all we have to do is the perfunctory part now, actually voting on the bills, moving them along the process, and putting them in front of the governor. And since the speaker and the governor and I agreed yesterday, my caucus went through and looked at things. You know, it's another thing to, one other point, if I could, that money, that extra money that came in last week through the Revenue Estimating Conference, about $965 million. It's important to note that 900 of those $965 million were one-time dollars. They weren't structural. And what we didn't do, and this is the part that's important, we didn't go out like drunken sailors in the past looking for projects and ways to spend money. We instead helped to pay down some of our debt, our long-term obligations, helped with school funding, and then created a rainy day fund, a savings account. The first time that we've had a decent-sized savings account in years. And it's just as if you were managing a household. You're paying off some of our credit card debt, and then we're taking a look internally to make sure we can manage our operations.
Randy Richardville, Senate Majority Leader.